Tucker Carlson is the #1 name in cable news. I know that's a bizarre thing and kind of a scary thing to hear, but it's also true. He has the #1 most popular news show in the United States. I want to just take a moment to shit on Robert Kennedy. Okay, now let me open that up in a more polite way. Speaking of Robert Kennedy, we were just talking about the impossible task he has to become president, how he's not going to be the Democratic nominee. But I also want to talk about, outside of the fact that he just doesn't have a chance, why he shouldn't be the Democratic nominee. And I could go into a lot of stuff into his background, whether it be the anti-vax promotion or a lot of his domestic political takes that I'm not happy with, how he's not popular with the Democratic base, how he has never run for an office like this before, he doesn't have the experience to do something like this. I can go into a million of the detail, like all the little itty bitty details, but I just want to hit on one point about an issue that I care a lot about. Now, earlier, about a week ago, or maybe not a week ago, maybe 4 or 5 days ago, I had covered a story on the channel about how Tucker Carlson pushed Russian propaganda live on air at Fox with zero retraction, zero edits, and nobody at Fox stopping him. The lie that he pushed was that for every one Russian soldier that died, 7 Ukrainian soldiers died. Now, this data came from altered leaked documents from the United States government. There were leaked documents, but there were also an altered version of it. And he used the altered version, not the original version, to come to that conclusion. Now, was it a good fake? No, not really. In fact, when these manipulated documents, they would only manipulate the one document that talks about the death toll, and they would not manipulate the other documents which refer to the original numbers. Not to mention the edit isn't that good. The spaces between letters doesn't look natural. It's different than the original. The coloring's different. Some of the numbers are kind of like cut in half. They like, it's not like the entirety of the 6, but like 10 to 20% of the 6 is missing. It's not a really good fake. And for whatever reason, Tucker Carlson took it and ran with it. Now, we can maybe believe that he didn't see through the fake, that he didn't do the research, that he messed up, that nobody at Fox did the research, nobody double checked. That could be part of it. That could be a contributor. That could be all of it. But I also have to believe, and I do think this is the case, that Tucker Carlson saw a piece of information online that reaffirmed what his belief was and what he wants to be true, because it would get him viewership, which is that Ukraine is losing. So he saw some data, did not do the legwork at all to check if it was true. He just accepted it was true, or maybe didn't even accept it was true, but accept that it would help his narrative. He took it and then blasted it on his show, having nobody at Fox fact check it for it. And let me tell you guys, Tucker Carlson is the #1 name in cable news. I know that's a bizarre thing and kind of a scary thing to hear, but it's also true. He has the #1 most popular news show in the United States. Period. If he's pulling in that kind of dough to Fox, where Fox News, no matter how much he lies, they'll not stop him. They'll let him keep going. That they'll settle $787 million in a Dominion lawsuit, in part to protect Tucker Carlson from having to testify in court and embarrass himself and hurt their brand and hurt one of the bigger stars. This is somebody that Fox News wants to protect because he has made them a lot of money through his fear-mongering. Now, if you have that in your mind now, that that's who he is to Fox, if he wanted people to fact check and check that everything he was saying on his show was true beforehand, he could have it. He just doesn't care. Either it's that he doesn't care to hire the people because he doesn't care if he's accurate, or that he did know and he just didn't care that he was lying because it served a narrative. Either way, we called him out on this. It's been days since then. Certainly people at Fox now must know that the data that he was putting out was altered, quite literally. Russian government propaganda manipulated with the intent of discouraging support to Ukraine, something that Tucker Carlson ate up and immediately delivered on that purpose to the Russian state. And what is happening now on his show as he interviews Robert Kennedy, somebody who is running for the Democratic nomination fruitlessly, mind you, but is running for the Democratic nomination. The numbers that Tucker Carlson was pushing on his show is now being regurgitated back to him again by Robert Kennedy, not in a very clean way. He kind of butchers it a little bit. But Tucker Carlson just accepts it on face value, no correction issued, and they just keep rolling, pushing these phony numbers. Now, the real numbers from the original data that came from the leaked documents was that for every one Russian soldier that died, no, for every one Ukrainian soldier that died, 2 Russian soldiers died. The data they push here is wildly different, actually completely flipping it and going further. It's not for every one Ukrainian soldier that dies, 2 Russian soldiers die. It's for every one Russian soldier that die, 7 to 8 Ukrainian soldiers die. Listen to this.
Nobody talks about this. There's 14,000 Ukrainian civilians who have died, but 300,000 troops. The Russians are killing Ukrainians at a 7-to-1 to 8-to-1 ratio. They cannot sustain this. What we're being told about this war is just not true.
This 300,000 number, I have no clue where he could have gotten it outside of one source. He just says that 300,000 troops, that is the casualty numbers of the Ukrainian military. That is ridiculous. There is no respected source that has pushed anything even close to that. I don't even see any of the most pro-Ukraine sources saying that Russia has took that level of casualties. That is an insane number, and the only person I've heard that regurgitated that number is Scott Ritter, the disgraced former UN weapons inspector who tried to sext underage girls on 3 separate occasions, one of which got him 5.5 years in prison. Somebody who can't do anything else these days but be a mouthpiece for the Russian government, because no mainstream outlet would take him, because A, he's a kitty diddler, and B, his predictions keep coming wrong. Saying that, oh, if Russia was to invade Ukraine, the government would immediately collapse. That isn't the case. Well, the militias that would pick up guns against the Russians would be annihilated. Well, that isn't the case. Every few weeks, he'll say, it's only a few more weeks until the front line collapses. That doesn't end up to be the case. He says, well, he said this in April. Well, if Zelensky, at the end of this war, Zelensky's going to actually be tried for war crimes. He's going to be brought before court and sentenced for war crimes. I'm positive about that. A year after he says that, Vladimir Putin has a warrant put out for his arrest for the kidnapping of over 6,000 Ukrainian children, probably more, from the International Criminal Court. The exact opposite of what he predicts is going to happen happens in almost every single instance. Not to even talk about all the lies by omission or just straight up lies. And this is one of them. I've heard him say that the Ukrainians have suffered 300,000 casualties. He has no real source for that number. He just kind of threw it out there. There's no factual basis for that number. But this is the type of stuff Scott Ritter, regurgitates regularly. And I'm not that surprised that Robert Kennedy, somebody who has his own history of conspiracy peddling, would just accept those numbers at face value. Moving on and continuing the Tucker Carlson anti-Ukraine power hour, I wanted to show another clip from the Tucker Carlson program where Tucker seems to think that there are nuclear weapons in Ukraine or sensitive nuclear technology that are weapons. Anyway, listen to the segment.
Not only has the Biden administration been maintaining these labs in Ukraine in the middle of a war, it also has, quote, sensitive nuclear technology in Ukraine as well. And no, we're not making that up. They admitted it today. Watch.
While Ukrainian staff are still operating the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, it does fall under the control of Russian armed forces and is currently being managed by Russia's state-owned nuclear energy firm Rosatom. So this is a significant concern. And essentially, in this letter that has been reviewed by CNN, sent by the U.S. Department of Energy to Rosatom, the U.S. government has essentially warned Moscow not to touch the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant because of this sensitive American nuclear technology at the plant.
So many questions here, but we'll begin with the biggest one. What exactly is, quote, sensitive American nuclear technology? Sensitive American nuclear technology? Probably not to produce energy. No one in the media is going to ask that question. But if it's in the middle of Ukraine, in the middle of a war, it stands to reason this sensitive American nuclear technology has military applications. In other words, these are nuclear weapons. What else could they be?
Dude, okay. I know this isn't talked about enough. I know this isn't talked about enough, but Tucker Carlson was on the invade Iraq train until the invasion actually happened and it didn't look pretty. Then he completely 180'd, right? This is just one example that if the conditions were slightly different, if we were to do this all again, if we were to wind back the clock and an opportunity provided itself again, Tucker Carlson would immediately be saying, of course, there's nuclear weapons. Yes, there's nuclear weapons. 100% there's nuclear weapons. I wonder why Tucker Carlson was so easily fooled by the United States government when it came to the nuclear weapons and him endorsing the invasion of Iraq. And then he learns nothing from his mistake. And then almost 20 years later, with zero evidence provided, based purely on conjecture, on what he interprets the words secretive nuclear technology to mean, he has now jumped to the conclusion that we have nuclear weapons stored in a currently Russian-occupied Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. A power plant, mind you, that's been occupied for about a year now. And if there were nuclear weapons there, I'm sure the Russians would have provided evidence of said nuclear weapons to the international community. It's not like, oh, you know, in the power plant, like there's like the secret nuclear vault that they're not allowed to go into and they can't crack the vault. Like, they've had access to it for over a year. Why haven't they exposed these nuclear weapons that Tucker Carlson has just manifested into existence with zero evidence whatsoever, based purely upon conjecture? This is a post-truth era on Fox News. There is nothing backing up what Tucker Carlson just said outside of the fact that the United States has shared nuclear technology with the Ukrainians. Now, I want you guys to guess here for a moment. Just sit down and think this through, right? Secretive nuclear technology is really the only conclusion, because Ukraine's at war, that the secret nuclear technology that we shared with them could only be used for military purposes. Secretive, sensitive, the word sensitive, sensitive nuclear technology. Not secretive, sensitive nuclear technology. The only type is nuclear weapons. Because I know, just from conversations that I've had with people who know a little bit about Ukraine's electricity infrastructure, and from the fact that I did the story on the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, I went across the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, filmed across the river, that about 50% of Ukraine's energy comes from these power plants. A very, very large contributor to their electricity infrastructure comes from nuclear power plants. Is it really that hard to believe that the United States, considering the fact that they have so much of their energy coming from these power plants, could have possibly shared sensitive technology around that with them, considering it's such a big part of the Ukrainian economy? Is it really that wild? I want to remind you guys that the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which is in Ukraine, is the largest nuclear power plant in all of Europe. All of Europe. It's impossible for there to be sensitive nuclear technology being shared with them by the United States that isn't just military focused. That's the only conclusion we can grab from the fact that we've shared nuclear technology with them is that we've shared nuclear weapons with them. Absolutely ridiculous. This is a post-truth era at Fox News, spearheaded by Tucker Carlson. He's just saying this because he doesn't like Ukraine. That's all he's saying. He's just setting this narrative. He's putting this forward. He's manifested this into existence because it makes Ukraine look bad with no evidence whatsoever, because it serves a narrative that he wants to deliver home and it gets him viewership. The almighty dollar is all they worship on his program, nothing else.